Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to the spring presentation of the Religious Studies Student Organization. My name is Charles Ringhan, and I'm the Vice President of RSSO. At my side is the lovely Taylor Wyman, our President for this academic year. The Religious Studies Student Organization is a group of students, primarily religious studies majors, who sponsor events that relate to the academic study of religion. As we usually do at these presentations, at this time, I'd like to ask that all the members of RSSO stand up so we can thank you for your hard work in organizing this event. We would also like to acknowledge our co-sponsors for their help in putting this event together: the Digital Arts and Culture Program and the Department of Art and Design.
If you're interested in learning more about the Religious Studies major, minor, or the organization, you can visit our website by Googling UWM Religious Studies. At the site, you'll find information and news about the program and the activities of RSSO. At this point, we'd like to introduce our speakers for this afternoon. David Leiberg graduated from UWM with degrees in Religious Studies and Fine Arts, with a concentration in drawing and painting. He's currently working on his master's in illustration at the Academy of Art University. He's been a featured artist at many conferences and was also showcased at the Dallas International Film Festival in 2011. For the past 2 years, he's been creating live sand paintings for Christopher West's production entitled Fill These Hearts, working with Mike Mangione and his band. Besides numerous shows throughout the United States, they've also performed to large audiences in Rome, Canada, and at the World Youth Day in Spain.
David will be accompanied by Mike Mangione and Patrick Hocker, who are members of the band Mike Mangione and the Union. Mike sings, plays guitar and harmonica, while Patrick plays the cello and guitar. 88.9 Radio Milwaukee nominated them for Band and Album of the Year. Their new album, Red Winged Blackbird Man, will be released sometime this year.
We are honored and fortunate to have David, Patrick, and Mike here today to show us the beauty and harmony of music, art, and religion. And so, please join us in welcoming David Leiberg, Patrick Hocker, and Mike Mangione.
In John Paul II's letter to artists, he writes that even when the culture and the church are far apart, that religion can act as a bridge to religion, or that art can act as a bridge to religious experience. And clearly when he wrote these words, he had in mind the kind of work I was doing in high school, and which clearly is not religious at all. And no part of me was interested in religion at the time. I inhabited that corner of the art room where the only acceptable subject matter were skulls, flames, bodies, blood. Any combination of those elements would probably be fine. The only religious symbols that we employed were maybe an upside-down cross or a pentagram. And even though I I grew up Catholic, I went to church every Sunday. And the church where I grew up was filled with artwork. It has stained glass windows and statues and paintings. And I never would have considered it art for 1 second. Never would have crossed my mind that that's artwork. It certainly wouldn't have crossed my mind that it was actually done sincerely by an artist somewhere who really wanted to do this. I probably thought most of it came from some giant religious art factory in Germany. They're pumping them out by the thousands. And maybe a lot of them do. But for me, the bigger thing was that I just never would have made the connection between the two. To me, the art that was in church was decoration. It was on par with wallpaper. I had very different influences in high school. I loved horror movies. Any horror movies I could watch, and on the weekends I'd watch like 3 or 4 of them, because I was kind of a dork. But in particular, I loved Sam Raimi's Evil Dead series. It's fantastic. I read a lot of Stephen King, read a lot of H.P. Lovecraft, And these are the great things that informed my early work in high school. And so what I liked about them, obviously I love the horror elements of it, I like the dark elements, and that's what I'm attracted to. But it was also, I love the storytelling. And for me, art was always connected to storytelling early on from comic books. That was like my first influence for making art, from comic books. So it's always been tied to storytelling. And what I also liked about these things, especially Evil Dead, and to some extent Stephen King, great dark humor in it. And I tried to bring these qualities into my artwork in high school as much as I could. And it got me in trouble periodically in high school. It's really the only thing that got me in trouble in high school. Around that time, I worked at Pick and Save as a utility clerk, really a beggar. And one day before going into work, I was inspired. I was inspired to do a drawing. And so I sat down, I drew a guy with the full Pick and Save garb. He's got the collared shirt, the apron, the name tag. But then, like I said, I was inspired, so I gave him, he had a severed arm in his hand and had a bite out of it, and there's blood all over the arm, and there's blood all over his mouth. And I wrote, Pick and Save, we eat people. It looked a lot like that. And I thought it was hilarious. I was like, this is so great. I need to, and what is, any artist who makes something beautiful, they want to share it with the world. They want to show other people. So I thought, I'm going to take this into work, and I'm going to hang it in the break room. And so I hung it up, and I thought it would be great. Just don't even tell anyone about it. It's just kind of there by like the inventory stuff and whatever else. And so someone's going to come in and see it, and it's just going to make them smile. The way it makes me smile and laugh. And then I put it there, and I worked my shift, and I completely forgot about it. Forgot that it was there, forgot that I had done it. I went home. Next day I can't come into work, and they're like, we have a meeting. Okay, for everyone coming on shift, come to the break and we have a meeting. Okay, I'm like, oh great, I'm going to get 5 or 10 extra minutes of sleep while they talk about the new bags or whatever. But much to my horror, when I got there, the manager held up my drawing. And she declared to everyone who was present that somebody very sick works here. And also this sick person apparently targeting the stock manager, Tom. I forgot that I put Tom on the name tag. Completely unintentionally, but he was horrified. Somebody had it out for him. These kind of things happened to me enough in high school, whether it was t-shirt designs for the cross-country team, I did designs for the swim team, posters I put up in the school, projects I did for my classes. I ended up getting in trouble periodically. It was just how it went. But besides these influences, besides like the dark humor that I was bringing in, there was another really important influence for me in high school. Somebody lent me a copy of 9 Inch Nails' Downward Spiral, and I loved it. And it's one of those things, and in high school everything seems so new, and I'm sure you can all kind of relate. You have that thing that just changed everything for you. You listen to it and you're like, wow, I want to do this, I want to do this. And for me it was Downward Spiral. And it has a lot of the similar elements that I like from the other things. It's very dark, it has some horrific elements to it, but it had some different things, something that was radically different. Trent Reznor was doing something that I really thought was beautiful. It was his blatant honesty in his work. It was passionate and emotive, and he just poured into his work. And I loved it. For me, it was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And what I loved about it is that this passion, this honesty that he poured into his work, however warped it may have been or whatever, it was a search, right? Because he's implying this passion to himself, like this look inside of himself. So it implies a certain search, something outside of the everyday. And I thought it was beautiful. And besides the search, it also implied that the process of making art was something valuable, something worthwhile. It wasn't just, art in service of something else. It was art just to make art. And to me, that was a really important change. And so from then on, I wanted to do artwork that was like that. I wanted to bring that into my work, and those kind of fundamental elements have been in my work ever since. And for the remainder of my high school and early undergraduate, it's the kind of lovely work that I did. My parents probably thought I was insane but they were still supportive somehow. But I was a little bit too immature for my undergraduate studies, and trying to take foundation courses just wasn't working. I went into school with that really wonderful attitude of, I know everything. Like, I know what I want to do as an artist. These people can't tell me, so why bother? That's great. That's really going to be a great way to go into school. So my wife and I, girlfriend at the time, my wife to be later, we dropped out of school, started working in bars and restaurants and taking it pretty easy. And I really focused on more productive things like growing dreadlocks and doing drugs. So it's really, way better than school, way more meaningful. And so they let these new, more experiential elements influence my work, these new states of mind. But thankfully during that time, even though we took it pretty easy, just for a while we kind of bounced around to different restaurants and bars to work in. Even though we were doing this, I still kept working on my art. I think most artists have that intuition to keep going, keep working at it even when it doesn't seem meaningful, or even when everything else in your life is kind of faded at the edges a little bit. But I kept going with it, and we were reading and listening and watching new things to influence my work. So during that time, some of the bigger ones for me, some of the more important things, were Neil Gaiman's Sandman comic book, Frank Herbert's Dune series, which I was completely obsessed with for a chunk of time. I even loved the David Lynch 80s movie. It's a good movie. And in particular, the band Tool. And all of these things, they carried a lot of the similar elements. So their storytelling is in there. Certainly with Tool, you have like that dark passion that's being poured into the work. But there was something different about all of them as well. And especially if you look at like Neil Gaiman's Sandman, you look at Frank Herbert's Dune, they bring in religious elements. Sandman is a mythological work, so there's mythological characters and themes that are religious in nature. And similarly with Frank Herbert's Dune, even though it's a science fiction book, the themes that are being presented are mostly religious. And the biggest one for me, though, was Tool. You wouldn't expect them as, if you were to hear them, if you're familiar with them, you wouldn't think, oh, there's religious themes in there. It's very, like I said, it's very dark, it's very passionate work. But really, it's filled with religious imagery, and it's filled with religious themes, and that, to me, was captivating, because it was a connection between that experience that I had listening to 9 Inch Nails and religion. Because when I had listened to 9 Inch Nails before, for me, that kind of wildness, that kind of emoting, that passion, that would have been the exact counterpoint to religion. It would have been not even close to it all, it would have been the opposite. Just complete opposite of religious experience, and from my perspective at the time. Because for me, it's like, what was that? It was beautiful, it was wild, it was free, and emotive. And what was religion for me at the time? It was cold and rigid and boring, confining. So it would have been the exact opposite. But with something like Tool, it showed me that some of these things might go together. Even in the interviews they gave, the recommended reading books they had, it was all geared towards religion. Most of it geared more towards Eastern traditions, but still geared towards religion. And so to me, it was kind of like, first of all, it got my interest into religion, and it showed me that these things somehow can exist together, on some level anyway. And so, decided I needed to change. So decided to go back to school. My wife had already gone back. She's always a few steps ahead of me. She had already gone back, but it was time to go to school, and I wanted to check out some of these religious, some of these things that I was interested in. And so, it was time to completely clean up, be a completely different person, right? Not really, no. Still, unfortunately, in similar states of mind when I was in my classes, even classes of great professors like Professor Beal, unfortunately. But I was starting to take religious studies courses, and in particular for me, the first course I took was an Intro to Asian Religions that I thought was amazing. I loved it. I loved everything about it, and I just wanted to take more and more, and so over the next couple of years, that's what I did. And I loved all of the courses. I just thought it was so fascinating and beautiful. And so, of course, something like this being so close to my heart, it was going to come out in my artwork. I was still doing my undergraduate in drawing and painting. So I spent a good chunk of time trying to figure out like how do these things work together. So it was a decent chunk of time where I did a very strange series of paintings where I'm trying to bring in, at some point the dreadlocks went away, they started to fall out. They were gross. Anyway, I started doing this series of paintings, but it was a way of I was trying to bring religion in, but keeping it at arm's length, kind of keeping it, just kind of keep it over here. So it gives me plausible deniability. If anyone asks me, hey man, is this about religion? I could be like, no. No, it's not. No, I'm not the weirdo doing religious art. Not now, no. So I was trying to bring them in, and we were kind of doing the same thing with our lives. Both my wife and I, we started, even though we're still working at bars, we're kind of feeling it out. We took a couple courses together, and we're like trying to bring some of it into our lives. We're not quite sure about it at the time. We started attending Wednesday night Mass at the Joan of Arc Chapel at Marquette. That's a really, really tiny chapel, really, really beautiful. It had not much decoration, has some pretty bad singing unless there's a couple people there. But my wife and I would hide in the back and kind of feel it out, see what's going on here. Had a great priest, Father Ray Goronsky, who did those masses at the time, and for me it was just hitting all the right notes, because he would very naturally bring in elements from Eastern traditions into his sermons, and for me it was like just hitting the right notes for me. And so it was a great experience, but it was also strange. I don't think we knew, if you asked us at the time, like, what are you doing here exactly? We'd been like, I don't know. And we'd be out late, and we'd wake up, and we'd go to the daily Mass. And it's just what we did, kind of working it out. And around the same time, a friend of mine lent me John Paul II's Letter to Artists. Now, it's kind of sad. I grew up Catholic, and I was interested in the church, but I knew almost nothing about John Paul II. I knew that he was very, very old, probably boring, really good. And so when I'm looking at the letter, I'm thinking, you know what is this guy going to tell me about art? This is something that's been an intimate part of my life for as long as I can remember. It's so important to me. What could he possibly have to say about it? But I decided to read it anyway. And it's kind of sad. My initial reaction to it is like, wow, this isn't intelligible at all, it's really sad, but that's how I reacted. But as I read it, there were some really excellent things. The whole letter is excellent if you ever get a chance to read it. It really is brilliant. But there were a couple of things that really stood out to me. And John Paul II was talking about giving value to the process, the experience of creating art. And that this was a valuable experience for an individual to what he called as a sincere disclosure of self, where you're pouring yourself out into your work. So works on the wall in time aren't just isolated, aren't just a work here, they're also a disclosure of an actual person. And to me that was really important, that level of sincerity in the work. And then he went on to say that this sincerity does imply a search. There's a search for meaning and truth, making meaning in our lives. Even when that search goes into the deepest depths of human nature or deals with evil. And so, of course, that would appeal to me, a little validation for my work. But it was, again, it was funny about it. It was like these things weren't something new. It wasn't like, oh wow, he's talking about something completely different. What was amazing to me was that these things were very, very similar to what I had experienced and intuited myself as an artist, coming from a completely different perspective. And so then to see that he was aware of this, of course he does have a background as a poet and a playwright, an actor, so his heart was of course in the arts. But to see that they could go together, to see that these things, somehow this works together, and all these things that I thought were important, they work, and he placed them in a context that was theological and meaningful. And so to me it was really, really important. And from then on, I'm trying, like, okay, well, sounds good in theory that these work together, but it was going to be another matter of trying to bring them still into my paintings. It still seemed like a bit of a struggle, is this experience going to work for religious paintings? And so I did a series, I'd say the most important series I did before I started doing overtly religious work, did a series from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And for me, the process that I had grown into was happened to be reading it. I loved the book, responded to a scene, and then just approached it. Just kind of poured myself into it and approached it with the most sincerity that I could. And of course, the scene is horrific. It's where this group comes out of a bar and this rowdy crowd, and they all hop into a wagon, and they're trying to get this old horse to pull them, which of course the horse can't pull the wagon even an inch. And they end up just beating the horse to death. And this is the kind of lovely stuff that I would present to my class on a regular basis, just a little taste of what they went through all the time. But anyway, to me, it's like I was still trying to bring in some of these religious elements. Dostoevsky was perfect for me at the time. There's a lot of religious overtones to what he's doing in his work. I was able to bring it in, but still kind of keep it at arm's length. But eventually, my wife and friends of mine convinced me, just go for it. You just gotta go for it and do some religious work. You're gonna have to be the weirdo in class and do religious work. So I decided I would. And what I did is it was the same method that I had done for the Dostoevsky, the same method that I had approached most of my artwork for a couple of years. I was reading the New Testament, and I responded to the scene where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And it just caught me, and I responded to it, and then I painted it. And to me, what was amazing about it seemed too simple, right? The process seemed way too familiar, like, this can't be right. There've got to be a number of rules and regulations before you call art religious. This can't be the appropriate way to do it. But we were able to have a couple of people look at it. We had Father Ray was nice enough to take a look at the image, and he loved it. He was moved by it. And the point wasn't that the people I talked to saw it and were like, oh, this is the most beautiful painting we've ever seen. But it was that validation that someone who I respected, who obviously knows so much more theologically than I do, would consider this to be a valid religious artwork. Kind of shocking to me. Like, okay, maybe I can do this. And so I spent the remainder of my undergraduate trying to work this out, trying to balance these different elements. I would rather clumsily, but discovering what things about the way I work on art are going to be enhanced by the religious subject matter. For me, it was fascinating. As I love working on storytelling, like I said, the great thing about religious narrative for me was that it's meant to be poured into. It's meant for that. There's methods of prayer where you pour yourself into a scene, you put yourself into the scene. And so it lends itself really well, I think, to that combination of sincere personal work that also has a narrative, has storytelling going on in it. And so trying to work it out clumsily for the next however many, probably a couple semesters, maybe 3 semesters. And about the same time, my wife and I were trying to do the same thing with our lives. Try and, we had come back into the church, we got married in the church, and so it's like, okay, how do these things fit? How does this work with our lives? What things need to go? What things are enhanced? And how is it going to work? And so, we had some conflicting things going on at the time. So we were open to children, which we hadn't really been before. So that was going to be something we were going to be doing, and the conflict to that was, in John Paul II's letter to artists, it was one of these things that did stand out to me as different, something I didn't quite understand before, is when he talked about art having value, like this has value, not monetary value necessarily, but this has value, this is something important, then that necessarily implies responsibility. It requires sacrifice, an obligation to keep working on it. And so, even when we have these things kind of coming together, we're open to having children. Also, we understood, thankfully my wife was understanding on the same page with me on it, that this is worth sacrificing for. This is something that's valuable. And so we're going to make sure I keep doing it. And they see kind of contrary things going, because of course we're going to want more money as we have children. So my wife, thankfully, went back to nursing school, and she worked through undergraduate and accelerated. It was an undergraduate and graduate program to become a nurse practitioner. And she had 2 kids in the middle of this, which is pretty impressive, in my opinion, and 2 kids after. So we have 4, and I have been staying home with the kids, working on my art, and it really have learned the true nature of horror. So that's able to bring that into my work. It helps really inform it that it hadn't before. So, but that's pretty much where we've been, and it's been a chance of trying to keep working at it, keep going. Like I said, I think most artists kind of intuit that. They have that natural tendency of, even when it doesn't appear valuable, you keep going. It's kind of like prayer in that way, you know. It doesn't appear externally to be valuable, but you still do it. You know it's important. You know it has value in and of itself, so you keep going. And so by doing that, it's opened up opportunities for different projects that work with what I'm doing, for working on my master's. So I've been spending my time staying up late, trying to work while the kids are sleeping, and trying to keep open to what comes, just to be ready for it, any opportunities. And one of the opportunities that came by, which ended up being a great opportunity, a completely unexpected one, was this opportunity to work with this event, Fill These Hearts. I had an old friend of mine who was one of the producers, and he was running this event with Christopher West, pretty well-known Catholic author and speaker. And the event was, Christopher West's work is centered around John Paul II's theology of the body, which is a whole other talk. But at the heart of what our event is, or the way I kind of perceive it, maybe I'm seeing it through my own lens, but it has so much to do with what I have been experiencing. How do these things go together? Finding this balance between the things that move me, certainly artistically, and religion. How does this work together? And so the event kind of, to me at its heart, is like, how does that experience that I had however many years ago, listening to Nine Inch Nails on my bed in high school, how does that experience that moved me, what does that have to do with religion? Is it in fact, like John Paul II says, can it act as a bridge to religious experience? And so that's so much about what the event is about. And what's great about the event is it's presented in truth via beauty. It's presented not just to talk about art, but something that brings beauty into the event. So we have Mike Mangione and the Union, who play music throughout the event and kind of go on and off with Christopher. We have a wonderful dancer who does beautiful work. And then they wanted me to do sand painting. And I had never heard of it. It was like 2 years ago, and my friend showed me some videos, and he's like, what do you think? I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean, what do I think? It's like, you think you could do that? And I'm like, no. No, I can't do that. But they were nice enough to kind of give me opportunities to work it out and eventually be a part of the event. So it's interesting, as I've gotten to know sand painting more, it really lends itself, I don't want to talk about it too much, I'd rather you just see it. But what's for me, what works well for me is that it lends itself to storytelling. And of course it lends itself to personal interaction with the audience, because it's live. They're a part of the process of making it in a way that isn't normal for visual artists. Normally I hide in a dark room and I make my stuff, and then I show it to people later. So this is a whole different experience for me, something obviously very normal for musicians, but for me, very, very different. So yeah, I'll be presenting it now out of context for the first time, so kind of the first time for everyone here. Let's see how that goes out of the context of the show. But I'd like to welcome up Mike Mangione, Patrick Hochter, who are going to accompany me.
My name is Mike, this is Patrick, and this is the, I don't know how much background we should give, how much is necessary, but one of the events one of the elements in the event, like Dave said, is this sand painting element, and one thing that I love about my new understanding of religious art is that it affirms a lot more artists than you would expect. And that religious art, to me, is artwork that reflects on what it means to be human. It reflects on the human mystery, which with that understanding opens up the possibilities of what religious art can be. So it's not just looking at a cross or at a Buddha, but rather looking at an experience, honestly, a pure reflection of an experience. And as a songwriter, that changes the game completely, and I can talk maybe a little more about that later. But so this is this whole presentation is just that it's a reflection on what it means to be a human in both song and form. So hopefully it translates. come meet me. I've been poisoned, I've been used, and I understand that you're good. I am living only thing. I love you still. In my day, I was deception. I was scared at control. I deceived all of my hope. Laying down the phone. You're unstable. I was lost in my attention. When the bleeding coincided, while I was blinding out my eyes. Yeah, I have direction. I have protection. I was free. But they ended up holding back. Ended up holding back. I did not come to take you. I came to let you take me in. And we're born ready to be dead. And it's the